Dude, Serval is terrible. She's a free 4-star lightning DPS and you get her in the mail. Honestly, bro, just get Jing Yuan. Wrong. You have just been blessed by a beautiful lightning goddess that will shock you away. And after watching this video, you should build Serval now. So if you're here to build our absolute lightning goat, rockstar goddess, I will be talking about Serval's best Lightcones and Relics, her best team comps, her playstyle, traces, all of this to make her the strongest she can be. My name is Gib, and let's get right into it. All right, so looking at Serval's traces here, she has her basic attack here, nothing too crazy, just does it lightning damage to a single person. Now, if they are shocked from her talent, they will also get hit multiple times from the basic attack and from her talent. And then we have her skill here. Serval's skill just does AoE damage. Pretty decent scaling, 154% at max level here. And this will also reapply with your from her talent. And lastly, we have the ult. AoE damage to everyone on the field, also extending their shock state for 2 turns. Now, this extends any shock that is on the enemy. Weakness break, another character shock, Serval's personal shock. All of them will get extended for 2 extra turns, so do keep that in mind. And then bonus abilities here. Bonus abilities, all good to get. First bonus ability here, increases your base chance for the shock. Pretty much makes it so it always lands, so you don't need to build any effect hit rate on her, because she will have plenty to land it on the enemies, unless they're shock resistant. And then we have her second bonus ability, which makes her start with 15 energy for free. Pretty nice, getting you that early ultimate. Makes it so when you're with Ting Yun, you start with ultimate. And then Mania, you just get a 20% attack boost after you kill an enemy for 2 turns. If you're playing against like Pure Fiction, this is usually up all the time, but if you're against like bossing, this usually falls off later into combat because you'll be fighting a boss, so there won't be minions. Unless they spawn in stuff, you know. If they spawn in stuff, can be pretty big. And then Serval's technique, she just starts the battle with shock on all of the enemies on the field. And this shock has its own scaling, 50% of her attack compared to her skill, which has a higher lightning dot on it. Lastly, regarding Serval's kit, let's talk about her talent priority. And for Serval, all of her talents are good, even her basic attack, because sometimes you want to basic attack. Mostly you're going to be trying to skill as much as possible. Her talent priority is your ultimate and your talent, and then your skill and your basic attack. Basic attack doesn't have the highest priority, but it is good because you will be basic attacking sometimes on Serval. And you don't lose that much damage since she has the extra damage from her Galvanic Cords talent as well. For Serval's Relics, pretty simple. Serval uses the newest Pioneer set that Acheron uses. She also can use the 4-piece Prisoner as well if you have dots on your team, if you're running her with like Kafka, or if you have like Black Swan. All of those would be potential candidates you could run her with. And then Pioneer, obviously just self-explanatory. She applies a shock and pretty much everything. Extra 24% crit damage and then 8% crit rate. You have, you know, the legendary 4-piece Quantum that any DPS can run. I wouldn't recommend this personally since Serval's like base relic options are pretty decent, but if you do have 4-piece Quantum laying around, you could also use this. And you also have the OG 4-piece Band. 4-piece Band is not that bad, but it is definitely gapped by the newer options. So if you are running it, I would only recommend maybe like the 2-piece if you haven't gotten a 4-piece of like Pioneer or something yet. And going for Planars here, Planars, she has a lot of options. Firmament is going to be her best, giving you the 12% attack and the 12% damage bonus. You should be reaching that 135 speed because Serval does want speed. And if you're not able to do a Firmament just yet, you will be able to use either an Inert Sasado for that ultimate damage boost or a Space Sealing Station, so you're getting that attack scaling on just pretty much everything, like your ult, your skill, your talent, and so on. And for Serval's main stats here, the stats that you want to have, you're going to want a crit rate or crit damage body. She does give herself a lot of crits, so you probably can go a crit damage body most likely. Speed boots or attack boots if you're playing like a Bronya or a Sparkle with her, so you're getting some action forwards. And then for your Planar and your rope, you're going to be going a lightning damage orb and you are going an attack percent rope. Alright, now for Serval's Lightcone options, she can pretty much use most of the Erudition Lightcones since Erudition doesn't have that many Lightcones. You have all the 5-star Lightcones, all of them work on her, except for Night in the Milky Way, only use that in Pure Fiction. Before Dawn is going to be her best in slot, along with an Instant Before Gaze, which is our Genji signature Lightcone. Those are going to be her best 5-star Lightcone options. And then for 4-star Lightcone options, you have Today is Another Peaceful Day, the QQ option from the Battle Pass, and you have Series of Breakfast and The Day the Cosmos Fell as free-to-play options. These are very solid. Cosmos obviously only use it when you are against lightning weak enemies for that extra crit damage. And then Genius's Repose only works if you're getting a lot of kills on enemies, so another pure fiction based light cone. While Serval's signature does give you extra ult damage and makes you start with extra energy, it is not very good for her because we have Sinister's Reckless. Alright, so looking at Serval's eidolons here, her E1 and E2 are very big for making your Serval damage increase overall in combat. E1 makes it so her basic attack has a adjacent attack after that does lightning damage at 60% of her attack. Pretty solid, gives you extra DPS when you're fighting multiple enemies. And this is why the basic attack is not bad on Serval, since you're pretty much doing a skill with her basic attack, so you get AoE damage. E2 makes it so anytime you hit someone that's shocked, she gets energy, which is why Serval is able to ult so much. And on top of this, if you ever, if you're ever testing like an ER rope or something, this is affected by ER rope as well. Sometimes in pure fiction, running an ER rope can go hard for having like a bunch of ultimates since the enemies will always be shocked. E3 is just a skill and basic attack increase, just solid overall. E4 makes it so that the ultimate applies shock to enemies not shocked and refreshes it. Her fifth one, just ultimate talent increase, and then her sixth one gives her the 30% damage increase to shocked enemies, which is very big. And on top of this, you get a little Serval naked. But to finish off eidolons here, biggest eidolons for having a DPS Serval are going to be E2 and E6. Highly recommend trying to get an E6 for that big 30% damage increase. So that junk's going to be massivo. Alright, now going into Serval team comps here. Serval has a lot of team comps, but most of them are centered around just her and Ting Yun. Ting Yun is an insane support for Serval because she can start with her ultimate at the start of the fight, and also it just makes her ultimate go from being 3-turn to 2-turn most of the time, which is very big. So most of your teams are going to be Serval with Ting Yun, and do keep that in mind as well. Ting Yun does come to the shop a lot, and she's on banner, so if you plan on playing Serval, definitely would recommend picking up Ting Yun. Ting Yun's also just a broken support overall. But I have two free-to-play team comps here, like early game. Do keep it in mind, I would not use these late game. These are like early game team comps. So first early game team comp here I've got is Serval, Dr. Ratio, Ting Yun, and Gallagher. This could obviously be like Fire MC or Natasha or whatever sustain you have. Maybe you start the game, you have like a Venturine here. Could also use him. Serval applies a debuff for Dr. Ratio, and Gallagher also applies a debuff, or if you have Fire MC, it also applies a debuff for Dr. Ratio, and then you have Serval for some extra AoE damage, which would be very nice. Then we have another team here, which is more of a hyper carry team. You have Serval with Asta, Ting Yun, and then a filler, preservation, abundance character to sustain you. This team is actually also good late game. This team is more of the early game one, because I would never play Dr. Ratio or Serval, because you can just have both of them be their own hyper carries. They're both strong on their own. Now going into some more late game team comps here. First team we have is Serval with Kafka, Ranmei, and then filler. I'm going to always have Fujuan here, but this can be replaced by literally anyone. But Fujuan does give you crit rate, which is very nice for Serval, so she can crit on her ultimates and stuff. So that's good to know. Kafka's Serval synergy is pretty much Kafka's shock really strong, Serval's shock is not as strong. Starting the fight with Kafka's technique makes it so that you have like a super strong shock that you'll permanently have on the enemy, because sometimes Kafka's shock gets lost on the enemy, so Serval can make sure that shock is always up on them, and they're just good damage together. Serval is kind of like a Nihility unit. Instead of her damage being backloaded, it's front-loaded from her ulting and just her skill and stuff, since she's a crit DPS. And then Ranmei here could also be a Ting Yun, but I'm just putting Ranmei here since it buffs both because you're running like a dual DPS team. Fourth team I have here is just more of a hyper carry team, Serval, Ting Yun, Ranmei, and then obviously filler sustain unit. Fifth team we've got going on here. This is probably a no speed boots build since Ting Yun will be giving you speed and Bronya will be action forwarding you. Another hyper carry team. Also for the Bronya team, you could have Sparkle here, and instead of Ting Yun, you can have Ranmei, so do keep that in mind as well. So you could have something like Serval, Ranmei, Sparkle, or you could have Sparkle, Bronya. That is also another team, but I do not have Sparkle to show her in here. This is also another hyper carry team, except more free-to-play friendly, I would say, with Pella and Ting Yun. You have Defense Shred, and then you Ting Yun in here, and then your filler sustain. Next team, have Defense Shred on Silverwolf if you need to, force lightning weakness. But Pella will be better in most scenarios for the AoE Death Shred. But if you are trying to brute force like a non-lightning res enemy, you can use Silverwolf in there. And this is a pure fiction team. showing Herta in Serval. Pretty much just delete everything. You know, Serval's constantly ulting, and Herta, you know, constantly got that, you know, got those spins, you know. And then Tingyun and Ranmei. If you need a sustain, you can obviously put a sustain in here. You know, maybe a Fujuan, a Luocha, you know, something, Gallagher, whoever you got sustain in here. Or you could replace Ranmei with maybe like a Pella, like DPS Pella or something like that, so that you can have some extra damage and defense shred if you're against an elite. And lastly, we have the ultimatum, the solo Serval team, the Godsend. Obviously, don't run solo Serval. Yeah. Oh, and lastly, I wanted to add, Black Swan does also work with Kafka here. Oh, instead of Kafka here, because Black Swan's ultimate applies the Arcana as a shock, which makes it so that Serval has another shocked enemy to hit. So let's say you started the fight and you're using like maybe like Tingyun here, you could actually ult Black Swan to get a insta shock on the enemy and have the damage bonus. Say the enemy's going faster than you, you can get that empowered ultimate on the enemy. I'll put a clip showing like what that would look like in combat instead of just me talking, so you can like see what it looks like. But Black Swan does also work here, and Black Swan gives you defense shred. So I would say this team is better than Kafka here, but both will work in gameplay. You'd think if Serval had glasses like her Eidolon art, you would literally bust. You know, Sunfire, I'm gonna preach with you. I'm gonna preach with you. If she had the scientist outfit going, shh,